Charges have been filed in the case of Tyler Robinson, as well as the prosecution's intent to seek the death penalty. So now what? And if he's convicted, will Tyler Robinson get the death penalty? Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this is The Breakdown. Make sure to subscribe to Legal AF to get all the legal updates on everything coming out of this presidential administration. So, Tyler Robinson arrested and charged in the death of Charlie Kirk. Now, I know folks have been like, why do we keep talking about the Charlie Kirk case? Trust and believe, I still want to see the Epstein files. Haven't lost attention on that. But I think this case is going to be a very interesting teaching tool in terms of how our criminal justice system works. Because realistically speaking, most people don't care about how the criminal justice system works until, sadly, it comes to their door, as in they end up surviving crime, or someone close to them is harmed, or someone close to them is charged. And that's when people start to think about the criminal justice system. But cases like these present an opportunity for us to dive deeper into our system, understand how it works, and be able to see if somebody's getting preferential treatment over here and somebody else over here is not getting justice. Because at the end of the day, who deserves public outrage is subjective. But we are all entitled to justice, period, end of story. So, diving into death penalty in Utah. So, in Utah, the prosecution had 30 days to file a notice of intent to seek death penalty. So, backing up for a second, whenever a prosecutor wants to seek the death penalty, the ultimate penalty that you can seek for any case, but applies to first-degree premeditated murder cases, they have to file a notice in court saying, hey, I intend to seek the death penalty. That puts everyone on notice because the court has to schedule things accordingly. There's going to be a lot more motions because it's a death penalty case. It also lets the defense know, like, hey, we're talking about death penalty. It's a whole different level of things here. And that also impacts who can be the defense attorney in this case, because not every defense attorney is certified or is what we call death penalty eligible. In other words, they have that expertise in dealing with death penalty cases, because that's not something you can learn on the fly. Okay, like this is something that takes time. There's special mitigation arguments that have to be used. There's a lot of procedural things that are involved. So not anybody can just get up and be like, okay, hey, I'm going to defend a death penalty case. It doesn't work that way. And interestingly, in the state of Utah, the public defender's office does not handle death penalty cases. So in this instance, in order to find representation for Tyler Robinson, the court, or basically the system, has to now go to the private defense bar. So attorneys that work for themselves, they have their own firm, or they work for a firm, whatever the case may be. They don't work for the public defender's office, but they know how to handle death penalty cases. They're going to that group of attorneys and being like, hey, can anybody take this on? And keep in mind, the rates that they're being paid are government rates. So they're not getting their usual door rate, let's say, of whatever it is, $1,000 an hour, $1,500 an hour. Oh, I'm taking on a death penalty case. It's $100,000. Boom. No, it's going to be rates that are set by the state of Utah, and that's all they're able to get. So they're not going to be nobody's making money off of this. Let's be very clear. Now, also, another interesting wrinkle with regards to the death penalty is that it also changes how the jury's being selected, because now during jury selection, the prosecutor and the defense have to dive into how people feel about the death penalty. Because if you have somebody on the jury who's 100% anti-death penalty, that's a problem. If somebody sits in jury selection and says, I am completely anti the death penalty because of my religion, because of my personal beliefs, or whatever, that person is automatically removed. The ideal juror here has to have an open mind in terms of the penalty, and they can't have a fixed idea like, no matter what, if I decide he's guilty, it's going to be life. period, end of story. No, that can't happen. That does not work. So that's why that announcement, that filing of the intent is so important, because again, now more time has to be set aside for jury selection, because you're asking a whole bunch of other questions and having a whole deeper discussion on things other than how do you feel about, the justice system in general, things like that. So there's that aspect. Now, other than what I just mentioned, the case proceeds as normal. So the investigation continues. The defense has to figure out what theory they're going to rely on in court. They're going to have to talk to their client. They're going to try and find if there are any other witnesses that could rebut the state's evidence to this juncture. All of that. And the prosecution, again, has to announce which witnesses they're going to potentially call. That's something that's listed in a document that is filed in court. So that's a requirement. So that way, again, the defense knows, all right, these are the people, this is the universe of evidence that can be presented. I'm going to have to talk to these people and figure out what they're going to say and how I can prepare the case around that. All of that still happens. The main difference now is when we get to trial, there's going to be 2 stages for the trial. First is going to be the guilt phase, whether or not Tyler Robinson is guilty of the death of Charlie Kirk. If the jury says, yes, he is, then the next phase, the next stage is the penalty. And so now the question is going to be, okay, he's been found guilty. Should he spend the rest of his life in prison, or should he face the death penalty? And in both stages, the jury has to be 100% unanimous. It can't be like 9 of y'all think death penalty is appropriate and 3 of y'all don't, but it moves forward anyway. Ironically, in my home state of Florida, that's actually a thing now. We don't have unanimous juries for first-degree murder and for certain types of aggravated child abuse cases. Now, that's unconstitutional, but of course you have to wait for the test case to happen to then appeal, to then take that to our highest court, and then of course it would proceed upward to the US Supreme Court. But that hasn't happened yet. So everywhere else, people seem to understand that you have to have a unanimous jury, especially in cases where, there's no do-over, right? You put somebody to death, you can't take it back. So there's that. Now, what's also played a huge role in all of this is the politics, because the president of the United States made it very clear in multiple media appearances that he wanted the death penalty for Tyler Robinson. Now, again, remember, Tyler Robinson is innocent until proven guilty. It has not been proven in a court of law that he's guilty, but the president has made a whole bunch of statements saying that he wants him to be executed. But what's interesting is that Utah was moving away from the death penalty. Like, that wasn't their jam for the last few years. This is kind of like an about face as a result of political pressure. So back in 2021, the Utah County Attorney, who is the one that is the lead prosecutor, that's the office, that is the lead prosecutor for this case. So it's the Utah County Attorney. The current Utah County Attorney is Jeff Gray. His predecessor, and the guy he ran against last time, announced that he would no longer seek death sentences because, again, he saw there was just this turn against capital punishment within the state. And these were by conservatives. This wasn't like a progressive liberal thing. These were conservatives being like, no, the math is not mathing on the death penalty. And there was also another high-profile push in 2022 to abolish the death penalty altogether in Utah. And it failed in committee by 1 vote. 1. So that tells you where the momentum was only 3 years ago. And, Utah state senators like Dan McKay had been telling all kinds of media outlets that death penalty sets a false expectation for society, sets a false expectation for the victims and their families, and increases the cost to the state of Utah. And so lots of studies have shown that Utah's death penalty system was really, really pricey, especially when you compared it to the cost of a life sentence. So a study found that each death penalty case cost $1.6 million extra. $1.6 million more than if you sought life in prison. So Utah folks were like, nah, no, 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 no. We're not feeling this math. Like, this is our tax dollars. We're not into this. And Utah had gone 14 years without carrying out an execution until last year in 2024, when a Native American man by the name of Tabaron Honey was executed for a murder that was committed in 1998. And last month, the Utah Supreme Court stopped an execution that was planned for a defendant by the name of Ralph Menzies, who was sent to death row for a murder that took place in 1986. So that was the other issue why folks in Utah were moving away from the death penalty, because they're like, this takes too long. And so where's the closure for the families? Where's the closure for, for the community? Because now the people who maybe cared the most about these cases may not be with us any longer, right? So it's kind of that mindset of justice delayed is justice denied type of thing. So those were the reasons why Utah was moving away from the death penalty. But again, because of politics, they've done an abrupt about-face. Now, and let's be clear, this case there's an argument to be made that this case would have been death penalty eligible without the politics. Because again, the prosecutor filed aggravated murder, which is a death penalty charge, and they have made arguments in support of that charge. And if they get a guilty at the end of trial, they could have pursued it the same way. And was it abnormal that they filed it in one day and when they had 30 days? Yeah, that's pretty quick. But again, when you're filing the charge, you already kind of know in your head where this is going. And by the time you get to that point where you're standing up in court at arraignment, sharing the charges, you've got your evidence, you know what key components you're going to rely on. You know what your witnesses for the most part are going to say. And so you've kind of gamed this out and been like, okay, yeah, we're going to announce death penalty because either A, we think we could get it, or B, which is controversial, B, that this could drive a plea. So in other words, a defendant facing the death penalty might be like, you know what? I'm not going to roll the dice and go to trial on this because I don't want to end up on death row. Let me just take this plea to life in prison. Again, there's arguments for and against that. Some people view that as extortion in terms of, listen, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. What about defending yourself and being like, listen, I'm innocent until proven guilty. Like, I want to make the government prove their case against me, right? But also, it's a gamble because if you lose, you're facing the ultimate penalty. So there's been a lot of controversy in terms of whether or not prosecutors should file the death penalty with the intent of getting a plea to life in prison. Sound off in the comments and let me know what you think about that. You think that's extortion or not? But anyway, getting back to this particular case, the question is whether or not Tyler Robinson will get the death penalty if he's convicted. And my guess at this juncture is no. And let me tell you why. He's going to have a jury of his peers. And who are his peers? Mostly going to be white, Mormon, Republican, gun owners, hunting enthusiasts. So, because remember, Tyler Robinson had been hunting since he was a little boy, and the rifle he allegedly used to commit this crime was a gift given to him by his grandfather. So this is very much consistent with gun culture. So you're going to have a jury of folks who have lived similar life experiences to this defendant, which again is the ideal, right? Because when they say a jury of your peers, it literally should be people that are your peers, that have similar life experiences, that understand the culture that you come from. And they're in all likelihood going to be Mormon. So I believe that they're going to sit in the jury box and they're going to look at Tyler Robinson and say, he reminds me of my son. He reminds me of my nephew. He seems like a good young man who was raised well, but just lost his way. Also, when you think about the faith component, Mormons believe in the power of forgiveness. That's something very integral to their faith. And related to that, Erica Kirk, the widow of Charlie Kirk, also announced that she forgave Tyler Robinson for killing her husband. So you have that whole faith aspect of like, okay, forgiveness, redemption, second chances, that sort of thing. I think that mindset may play a role in what the jury is thinking and feeling and how they're receiving this evidence and this information. And that's something that's going to be a bit of an uphill battle for the prosecution and being like, don't feel bad for this young man. You know, he's a murderer, he's this, he's that, and the other. And try to kind of break that, I wouldn't say solidarity, but that relatability that they may be experiencing. But also what's going to be a tough one is the fact that Tyler Robinson's parents were the ones who turned him in. Because again, that speaks to his upbringing, that speaks to the kind of values that his parents have. And trust and believe, as much as any juror, you can say in ask in jury selection, oh, did you hear about any publicity having to do this case? Have you heard anything? They all heard that the parents turned him in. They're all coming in to this trial knowing that the parents turned him in. So in their mindset, they're going to be thinking, listen, he was raised well. He was a good kid. He didn't have any prior contacts with the criminal justice system. He just lost his way. You know, maybe if he goes to prison for the rest of his life, that would be enough to say this is justice and is also in keeping with our religious beliefs. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but this is a very real scenario that the prosecutors are going to have to think about and grapple with, and also arrange their case and the evidence accordingly to be able to try and overcome that. I just don't know if they'll be able to. So we'll see. I'll keep reporting on different aspects of this case. Again, to me, this is very interesting from a legal perspective and just kind of as someone who is a former prosecutor. And this has been my world literally for my entire career for the most part. I find this very interesting and all the different machinations interesting. And of course, I am answering audience questions on this. So if you have questions with regards to what's happening in this case or why certain things are happening, you already know what to do. Hit me up in the comments and I will be sure to try and answer your question. I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this was The Breakdown. Take care.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.